The growing unrest across Syria puts more pressure on Bashar al-Assad as his security forces intensify their crackdown. But what happened to reforms promised by the president at the beginning of the uprising? And is a new cabinet the solution? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Ghida Fakhry. Stability in Syria has become a major cause for concern for local authorities as anti-government protests spread to the country's second largest city, Aleppo. Meanwhile, in the capital itself, several hundred students protested for a second day against the government at Damascus University. As security forces clamped down on protesting students, the government was quick to accuse the Muslim Brotherhood of being behind the unrest. But as protests continue to spread throughout the country, is Bashar al-Assad's tight grip over Syria beginning to slip? To discuss all this, I'm joined by our guests from Amsterdam, Iyas Maleh from the Haitham Maleh Foundation for the Defense of Human Rights Defenders in Syria, and from Manchester, Ousama Monajed, a Syrian political activist. Ousama Monajed, let me ask you this. The protests, as we say, continue to spread. The government now saying that it is time to reshuffle the cabinet. Is this a desperate PR stunt by the president himself, or could it really be the beginning of what might be a genuine process of political reform?
Well, they had their chances of political reforms, decades ago, even in Bashar's era, more than 11 years ago. This is, as you called it, a desperate call, just try to appease the more and more people joining the uprising throughout the country. But the uprising is gaining momentum, as we've seen in Aleppo yesterday and in various parts of the country. All cities, towns and villages now, we've seen demonstrations within, and more people are joining. Even those who were on the side, undecided, were some kind of believers that Bashar was a reformer. After the bullets that were shot at the peaceful protesters, and after the brutal treatment of the security forces to those peaceful demonstrations, those undecided joined also the uprising. The regime cannot fool no one with this whole government reshuffle thing. We all know ministers in Syria are all puppets. It's a facade for this whole military rule. They want this kind of facade of civilians dressing in pinstripe suits and talking languages, but in fact a minister in Syria cannot decide on micro issue, let alone macro issues or changing policy.
Iyas Maleh, can this reshuffle be dismissed outright? After all, we've yet to see who will form part of this new cabinet. Does it matter who it is, whether the members of the ruling Ba'ath Party are prominent, whether there are independents, whether there are opposition members? Or do you think, as Ousama Monajed does, that at the end of the day it won't mean very much if this new cabinet isn't granted real authorities?
It really doesn't matter, as you said and Ousama mentioned earlier, and we have seen it happen in Egypt before, where the president government collapsed. He formed a new government. People did not stop protesting, because really the issue is not there. It's not in the government that is, like Ousama said, is a facade, really. Not even the prime minister in Syria can do anything. Not even the vice president can decide on major issues. It's the president and his security advisors. Those are really the decision makers. So
But could this reshuffle, though, could it lead to renegotiating of the relationship between the different centers of power, between the president and the army, between the president and the security services, between the president and members of his own clan?
I really don't think so. It's the security advisors around the president will not let their grip go. And this is really what's holding up the reforms for the last 11 years. And it's not going to stop now because demonstrators are on the street. Unfortunately, they think that they can clamp down on the demonstrators and stop it, but like we have seen in Egypt and other places, it's not going to stop. It's going to escalate. So the president right now, I think, is at a really major decision making, whether he will pack up and leave like the people would like to see, or he is going to continue killing more and become another criminal on the run.
Ousama Monajed,
like
how much of the current dilemma the government is facing is to do with its own handling of the situation, having allowed the situation perhaps to get out of hand, to spread in the way it did because of the violent crackdown that was implemented in some parts of the country?
Well, this is one of the terrific non-violent struggle, is that a dictatorship will face dilemmas. If they clamp down on protesters and shot and use brutal force to clamp down on protesters, that will cause more casualties and then more funerals, and during the funerals there will be more casualties, and the cycle of violence from the regime side will continue, and we'll see more and more people joining the uprising because they see what is happening to their brothers and sisters in the country. And if they did not use brutal violence and let the uprising be, then the uprising will gain more momentum, and people will be more will crack the wall of fears in their in their inner minds, and will join the uprising again, because there will be no killing and no brutal force against them. So this is a dilemma. Another dilemma is, if the regime really offered reforms at this point, people would say, yes, we are in control, we managed to get something genuine out of this regime, out of this mafia, after all, and with only a few weeks of demonstrations. So let's carry on. People would feel that they are in action and the regime is in reaction phase. On the contrary, if they did not offer genuine reforms, and they kept just talking about promises and studies and stuff, then people would keep also protesting and demanding genuine reforms. So it's again another dilemma. You see, whatever they are doing, we believe they are going. Well, they will be persecuted also, and they will be. This whole dictatorship will be knocked off.
Well, let's bring into our discussion now Professor George Jabbour, a former member of the Syrian Parliament. Professor Jabbour, is the president of Syria missing the point by deciding to reshuffle his government, his cabinet? Is he simply shifting the blame downwards without really assuming any responsibility for what's been going on?
Well, forming a new cabinet is certainly a sign of response to the demands of the demonstrators. Other signs of response to the demands of the demonstrators are also there, and they are quite clear. One of them was the granting of nationality to some Syrian citizens who were deprived of this nationality. Some of the replies were the establishment of investigating committee in order to see what really happened.
How difficult would it have been for the president to answer one of the key demands of the protesters, which was the lifting of the state of emergency?
Well, lifting of the state of emergency was something that was promised recently by Hussein Shaban, and then it was approved by the president in his speech on the 30th of March. I think it is a matter of perhaps few days. But then there is something important in this question. We are really in a state of emergency now. Is it the opportune time to lift the state of emergency? I say this: I am for the lifting of the state of emergency as of this moment, notwithstanding the fact that we are in a real state of emergency. Why? Because the people ask for the lifting of the state of emergency. There is a general consensus on that in the government, in the Ba'ath Party, and amongst the population. So I am for the lifting of the state of emergency, but it looks rather ironic that we lift the state of emergency at a time when there is a need for a state of emergency. What I hope is that peace will return to Syria, and the sooner the better. There will be no bloodshed, There will be no fighting. There will be real evaluation of the demands of the protesters, real implementation of the demands of the protesters, and I suppose that things will go well, and I hope this will mark a good beginning for a new era in Syria.
Iyas Maleh, the government's perspective articulated there by Professor George Jabbour is that the priority should now be given to security and to ensuring that there is stability in Syria. Reforms will come later. Your reaction?
That's the game that the government play, always trying to buy time. Lifting the state of emergency does not take more than 5 minutes of the president's time. When he came to power, they changed the constitution, and we are not talking about lifting a state of emergency, but the whole constitution was changed in less than 5 minutes, so he can become the president. When the people now are demanding the lifting of state of emergency, it's been more than 2 weeks since he spoke. What happened? What it's taking time? It does not take a committee to decide to lift the state of emergency. It's only take a decision of the president. The people are asking for the release of the detainees, the political prisoners, the prisoner of opinion. It's been a month now, more than a month since the demonstrations have started. What it's taking that long? Why, when he released the general amnesty that only fit my father as a political prisoner of opinion, it did not include anybody else? Why is that? When people are demanding the release of their family members who are detained, what is taking so long?
Ousama
they
Monajed,
talk about releasing
many demands, and you've articulated a few there, Mr. Maleh. But Ousama Monajed, demonstrators, some of them at least, have also been asking the government for citizenship for the Kurdish population. The president has in fact granted Syrian citizenship to 150,000 Syrian Kurds. He's also allowed school professors to wear the full-face veil at schools. Is he simply trying to placate some within the Syrian community, the Kurds and the Islamists, or does it mean something at least to other segments of the demonstrators? Does it mean very much to them?
The regime is just trying to play cards here. They're just trying now to appease certain segments of the society so they don't join the uprising in masses, being Islamist or Kurdish. Now they realize that there are about 200,000, 300,000 Kurds with no nationality, and now they realize that their decision to prohibit these veiled women from teaching is wrong. Not a single demonstrator or protester asked for a government or a government reshuffle or for the government to resign. This is a big fat lie. All protesters now demanding lifting the state of emergency, releasing all political prisoners, and stop the killing, everyday killing in the streets, and the torture and kidnapping. Stop the killing civilians, civilian protesters. But because the demands were not met and they were only faced with brutality, now they all chant and demand that people want to topple the regime, as we've seen the same chanting in Egypt and Tunisia. Exactly the same chanting, and no one would go back home until this whole regime is out and they are put to trial.
Professor Jabbour, is President Assad repeating the same mistake that was made in Tunisia and in Egypt, blaming it all on the cabinet and its ministers, trying to sack a few governors? Does that solve the solution, or is it simply shifting the blame?
Well, it is not blaming it on the cabinet. The cabinet in the Syrian constitution is the highest executive office. And the policy of the state is planned by the president himself. The cabinet is an executive authority. Now, the performance of one minister may differ from the performance of another.
Why is the cabinet being reshuffled, though, if it's not blaming it on the cabinet?
No, the reshuffling of the cabinet is something that is usually done rather, well, at intervals. In Syria, we had the last shuffle a few months ago, about 4 months ago. The Minister of Culture was replaced by another minister. The Minister of Irrigation was replaced by another minister. This is an ordinary exercise. But then we can understand the reshuffling recently of something more serious. A new prime minister was appointed, and the cabinet altogether has resigned. Other reshuffles usually kept the prime minister in his place, kept most of the ministers in their place. Now, of course, we are looking for new faces. Let us remember that Prime Minister Otari stayed in office for something like 8 years, which is rather unusual. But then the reshuffling, the forming of a new cabinet presents a new opportunity for new policies.
So obviously the protesters want to see new faces. Will we see fewer faces from the Ba'ath Party? Will we see an increasing role for other political parties in the political life of Syria, or will it be the status quo?
Well, the Syrian people obviously want to see new faces across the board, starting from the president and down. They do not want to see anybody left from the ruling Ba'ath Party faces in offices anymore. I think that's very clear demands of the people.
How confident are you that more parties will be involved in the political life in Syria?
Well, obviously we see what people are requesting on the ground. That's what they are demanding for. They are demanding a change, an end for this regime.
A change and an end to this regime. Ousama Monajed, it didn't start this way, did it? Much of the anger of the demonstrators in the streets of Daraa, Douma, now Aleppo, and other places was not directed at the president, was it? Is he beginning to lose some of the goodwill of the people?
Well, there were people obviously on the margins. There were people around the regime or in the middle and undecided who thought or genuinely thought that Bashar was a reformer. He managed to fool few leaders in the international community that he is a reformer. What we've seen, his type of reform comes in bullets and machine guns. Unfortunately, things escalated. Obviously, the demands were not the same when the uprising started in March 15th. People only asked for lifting the state of emergency, releasing political prisoners, and stop the killing of everyone in the street. But because of the extreme violence we've seen, demands escalated to toppling the whole regime and getting rid of the whole old system from the president down. And here is an interesting part or note to highlight that even with the regime tried to play the sectarian card for a few days. It did not work. The same day, the same night, people of Latakia went on the streets and said, "We're all Syrians, all one hand." They tried to use these.
Let me ask Professor Jabbour this, if he can hear me. Did the government miscalculate by playing the sectarian card, by blaming much of the unrest on the Muslim Brotherhood, by criminalizing the protesters and putting this whole issue in very sectarian terms?
Well, we have to say something. I have to say something in this regard. There is Sheikh Qaradawi who sort of talked a sectarian language, and we did not like it in Syria. I suppose even my friends who have Islamic tendencies did not approve of the statements of Sheikh Qaradawi, who talked a sectarian language. Now in Syria, we are far from the sectarian language. We despise it. We think that it is unthinkable to think of a citizen as belonging to this or that sect. Yet, we are neighbors to Lebanon. And Lebanon, of course, the whole political life is based on sectarianism. And then there is sectarianism in the area altogether. And this is bad for Syria, bad for workers on a human rights basis in politics. And I think that we have to overcome this. The government is certainly against sectarianism. And I suppose most of the demonstrators, perhaps all of the demonstrators, I cannot judge, are against sectarianism. We have to be all against sectarianism. We consider ourselves for and foremost Syrian citizens, and this is enough as an identification.
Iyas Maleh, do you accept that argument?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree that we are a society that is, in general, against sectarianism. But with all due respect to Professor Jabbour, the first one really who spoke about sectarianism and brought the issue up was Buthaina Sha'ban and was not Dr. Qaradawi. So let's keep the facts straight.
What about the accusations against the Muslim Brotherhood? Are these warranted, or have members of the groups been politically eliminated a long time ago.
I mean, it's very well known to everyone that since the 80s, Muslim Brotherhood does not exist on the ground in Syria. We have a law number 49 on the books in Syria that is sentence everyone who is suspected of belonging to the Muslim Brotherhood to death. So that excuse, that lie that the government brought up you know, nobody will believe that. That the Muslim Brotherhood is behind all this.
Professor Jabbour, going back to you on the issue of the support base that Bashar al-Assad still has, how significant do you think it is? How broad-based and how genuine is it?
Well, a little comment on law number 49. I am personally against it. I think that it is not applied at all. Sheikh Qaradawi visited Syria and he is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and then he was not detained. He met the president. He praised the president. So I suppose we have to take law number 49 in the circumstances in which it was passed.
I'm asking you about the support base that President Bashar. I'm asking you about the support base that President Bashar al-Assad still enjoys today. I'm asking you about how much support President Bashar al-Assad still enjoys in Syria today. He was once thought to be a reformer.
I suppose
is he still?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I suppose we have witnessed the demonstrations that of support for President Assad recently. And then, of course, we witness some demonstrations here and there against President Assad. At times I wonder, and I would like my friend Haitham Maleh to more or less think with me on that. How can we make a sort of real referendum, a real reading of the state of opinion in Syria? We witnessed 1 million and even more than 1 million persons demonstration in Syria in support of President Assad. And we are witnessing demonstrations against President Assad. Where the will of the people lies? This is a very good question. And then again, when we say that we have to make free elections, well, on the basis of what law? What electoral law which shall we choose? This is also important things. I asked the demonstrators, and some of them are distinguished in their insight and in their feeling of public responsibility, to address themselves to these issues and to address these issues positively. I remember very nicely that one Al-Ba'ath newspaper asked me to express my views on the lifting of the state of emergency. I told them that the best expert on the emergency law is lawyer Haitham Maleh. And they contacted him, and I am glad that his view on the law of emergency was published near my view on it, and we both advocated the abrogation of the state of emergency. So I suppose that this is a very blessed moment with my esteemed colleagues if we direct our attention to positive reconstruction of more democratic Syria, more peaceful Syria, within a process of peaceful political reform.
Let's quickly get Iyas Maleh to respond to this.
How can you look positively when every day people are being killed on the street just simply for walking in the street and saying what's on their mind? How can you look positively at any promises of reforms? These are simply lies. If the killings will stop, maybe people can think maybe there is a real, honest, sincere promise of reforms. But obviously, when you kill people while you are talking in the morning on TV saying, I promise reforms, and then in the evening we hear of people getting killed, that is not a promise of reform. If that president cannot control his security forces, then he does not deserve to be a president. It's simple.
Iyas Maleh, Ousama Monajed, and George Jabbour, thank you all very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. And thank you for being with us. We, of course, welcome your suggestions and comments. As always, do email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me and the team, thanks for watching.